Welcome to On the Table, a podcast about board games, card games, and tabletop war games. And welcome back to On the Table Gaming. I'm Chase, and I'm joined by Simon, my co-host. And this week we have a really special guest in the form of Jim Ludwig from Dark Sword Miniatures. Jim, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me on, guys.
So I'm really excited to talk to you because I feel like already I've gotten the sense that you may be as big a fan, if not more, of this whole property and the things that are going on with miniatures than even I am. So I already can sense your enthusiasm from our preamble before. So,
for sure. Absolutely. I mean, this has been something that's been a long time in the making. And huge fan of the game, huge fan of just a whole mess of games that Cool Mini's been coming out with over the years and that Michael Schnall's developed. Big fan of like Rum and Bones and stuff like that. And some of the other like skirmish games that they developed as well, Wrath of Kings and Dark Age and stuff like that. And so, yeah, it's when we put this together, it was meant to be, right? In terms of Dark Sword working with Cool Mini. I've been buddies with one of the founders of Cool Mini since about 2003. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Well, before we get into some of that, let's start off with Dark Sword Miniatures. Now, you make amazing miniatures that are often inspired or your masterwork miniatures based on some of the artwork by people like Larry Elmore, Keith Parkinson, Jeff Easley, and others. How did that begin? What was the genesis of Dark Sword Miniatures? How did you find yourself in this position where you've got this company doing this amazing work?
Well, that is, it's an interesting story. As a young lad in the 80s, my aunt got me a Dungeons and Dragons basic set for Christmas one year, and it was like about 80, I don't know, 1 or 2 or something like that. And I just was like mesmerized with the game. And then a few years in, a buddy of mine got these miniatures for the game, right? You're like, what? And and I was a big Star Wars, in the 70s and stuff like that. Grew up on Star Wars, the action figures, Legos, and Lego Space and all of that stuff. And so it's like, for whatever reason, the miniatures just really like spoke to me, and I just loved like that 3D representation of like, okay, well, here's this character, here's this monster, here, whatever, and here they are next to each other, and so here's like the size differences and stuff like that. And the painting, the hobby, the whole thing. So it kind of became like a hobby within a hobby. And that's how it goes with a lot of people, even people that play the Song of Ice and Fire Miniatures game. Some of them don't even play it. They just collect all of the models and they paint them up beautifully and they display them. And it's the whole painting thing. Some of them play the game like crazy, but don't paint the models. So it's all about the game. And so I really took to the miniatures side of it as well. And so it was kind of like two hobbies in one for me all through the 80s and 90s. So when I wasn't able to play D&D with like my Dungeons and Dragons group and stuff like that, I was still collecting and painting miniatures and whatnot through that time. So it always kind of kept me grounded in the hobby. So that's kind of like me as young Jim that did that. In the 90s, a lot of stuff happened with the advent of this game called Magic the Gathering. It kind of put the rest of the industry on its knees, including Dungeons and Dragons, miniatures, everything, because these collectible card games just took off and was like printing money for a lot of these companies. And the downside of that is you had a lot of prominent companies, either go bankrupt or be put on their knees or get acquired or something like that. And two of the big miniature companies that I collected as a kid, Grenadier Miniatures and Raul Partha Miniatures, both of those companies, Grenadier went out of business like in 96, 97, somewhere in there. And then Raul Partha was acquired by FASA, who then came out with this game called Mage Knight, like around Y2K, late 90s Y2K. And they acquired the company to use the miniatures in that. But Raul Partha used to have this licensed Advanced Dungeons and Dragons line that came out basically with Dungeons and Dragons 2nd edition. And they also had some other lines, like one of the lines was based on this artist named Larry Elmore, who I was a huge fan of from, the TSR Dungeons and Dragons days.
Yeah.
And so that was specifically just based off of his artwork that was not Dungeons and Dragons, right? It's all very Dungeons and Dragons inspired and the themes and all that stuff, but it wasn't stuff that he did while he was at TSR, right? Because TSR owned all that. So when Partha got gobbled up, and I don't know if they officially went bankrupt or I think they just got gobbled up. And then they kind of shut down when WizKids was really going crazy, shut down the whole pewter casting and stuff like that. This Larry Elmore line that I loved that was being sculpted up by like Tom Meyer and Dennis Mize and stuff like that, it went away. And there was this other miniatures company that was out at the time, this fledgling young company called Reaper Miniatures out of Texas. And I was like, and I had somehow developed like a friendship with Larry Elmore because I bought so many of his prints and stuff like that. I met him at conventions and whatever. I was like, man, you need to go to Reaper Miniatures and freaking, get them to make new miniatures based off of your artwork and stuff like that, because, they're kind of an up and coming miniature company now that's getting really well established, and Raw Partha's not doing it anymore. They lost the license and stuff like that. And he never really got around to doing it. So I got frustrated to the point where I'm like, I was working in corporate America doing my thing. I'm like, you know what, Larry, tell you what, I'll just start a miniatures company and I'll freaking make the miniatures. I'll get the best sculptors that used to sculpt for Partha and stuff like that. And I'll just do that. Is that something you'd be up for? He's like, sure. Yeah, let's do it. Type of thing. And so that's, kind of what got Dark Sword started. And then it snowballed from there, where in my mind, it's like, well, why not do kind of the Fab Four, the four, horsemen of the apocalypse, which are Larry Elmore, Keith Parkinson, Jeff Easley, and Clyde Caldwell, which were these big iconic artists that they brought in the early 80s, early to mid 80s, at the behest of all the book publishers and distributors, to give Dungeons and Dragons a more polished look, if you will, right? And make it more like the big fantasy book covers and stuff that you saw from Frazetta and Boris and stuff like that, and the Hildebrandt brothers and whatnot, because the original Dungeons and Dragons book, has got this great art that I love and adore, but apparently like the distributors felt it wasn't as professional as it could be. So they brought in these guys, Larry Elmore, and they did this more fantastical realism look, where with scenery and stuff like that, in the background with landscapes and whatever, where you didn't get a ton of that back in the old Dungeons and Dragons art, for first edition and original edition and stuff like that. So long story long, kind of felt like, well, we could, why stop with Larry Elmore? We can do miniatures, based off of Jeff Easley's art and Keith Parkinson's art and Clyde Caldwell's art and other stuff too, and do our own original stuff. And so that's kind of where, I started the company back in 2002. In 2003, we were at our first Gen Con, with 2 box sets of 6 miniatures each, and then the limited edition miniature, and the rest is kind of history. George R.R. Martin, actually, I had the books. I had a bunch of buddies of mine who were like, oh my God, you got to read these books, Song of Ice and Fire. I had these books on my shelf, but I hadn't read them yet. So this guy named George R.R. Martin contacts me via email, like out of the blue, thinking like our miniatures are gaming scale miniatures, right? So they're, what's called heroic 28 millimeter, what have you. He had contacted me. He thought they were all 54 because they were so detailed. He's like, oh, these 54s, because if they were, I'd buy them all because I'm a big 54 collector. I'm like, I know they're all gaming scale. Thank you for the compliments. And I responded at the end of the email saying, hey, are you the George R.R. Martin? And I still got the email. I saved the email all these years later. And golly, I let me pull it up here, because it was basically, he responded, yes, I am he, or something like that, or whatever. And I was like, oh my God. And so I said, hey, a bunch of my buddies have read your book series. I've got them here. I haven't read them yet. It's like, you should read them. They're really good.
Okay, you do the George voice too. You got
yeah. And so basically he sent me that back in 2005. So he said some, anyway, he had some funny response where, so then we got talking, and then we started talking on the phone and stuff like that. And, that then led to Dark Sword acquiring the license after a company named Testers, a huge model and paint company.
Oh, yeah.
Had it for a couple of years, and they just, didn't really do much with it. I don't know if they got a little too grandiose in their plans, or if they just kind of they just couldn't focus on stuff. I don't know what the deal was, but needless to say, not much came out, and it kind of they just didn't do much with it. So George did not renew the license, and he wanted Dark Sword to take the license, for miniatures and miniature skirmish games, board games, stuff like that, right? And
that's
so
awesome.
So that's kind of how but George and I used to chit chat, golly, every week or two. This is back in the early days, folks. So there was no HBO, Game of Thrones yet, or any of that stuff. It was all being worked on and developed and stuff like that, but the show wasn't green lit or anything like that. And so, we used to talk quite a bit, but now that he's super Hollywood famous and all of that stuff, we don't talk nearly as much as we used to. Like, he'll ping me every once in a while, text me or call me out of the blue or whatever. And I'll have to drop everything, of course, and take the call because it's George. And, so we still catch up. He's still a huge miniatures fan and all of that stuff. And he just loves minis. He's got a huge collection. For any of the people that have seen interviews or pictures from his writing house that he does all the writing and his offices are out of and stuff like that. He's got like a massive collection of everything from gaming scale stuff up into like 90 millimeter stuff. So it's pretty cool.
So when you started working with George, first of all, how did you make the decision about which miniatures to do first? Did George says, I really want these miniatures, or were you like, we really need to do these ones? How did you sort of figure out what the initial miniatures should be?
Well, that's a great question. A lot of it was basically just kind of going opposite of what testers did, because they originally just went right into trying to make a skirmish game, right? And so there was no named characters really. Yeah, I believe they did a Rattleshirt sculpt who had like a removable helmet that Gene Van Horn did. I got a copy of it. It was never released or whatever. I think George gave me a copy of it or whatever. But they didn't really release any name. It was all just like Night's Watch and Free Folk, right? And they even had like Steve Saunders do like a giant for the Free Folk and stuff like that. They had some mounted, they had a couple mounted, figures or whatever, but it was just this small scale skirmish game, like, 8 to 10 models aside type of thing. And one of the things that a lot of people are saying is like, well, okay, that's all fine and dandy, but that can literally be anything. Right. It's like, right. And they were working on like some 54 millimeter miniatures. They did a neat one that I think did get released of like Jon Snow and Ghost and stuff like that, but they never really were able to kind of get anything off the ground. And so one of the things as a fan, I'd started reading the books obviously at this point. And I think I was all caught up at that point, like when we started diving into it with the first 3 books that were out. And then I think Feast for Crows came out shortly thereafter. I was like, well, we got to do named characters and we got to do key name characters. Right. And so you'll notice within like the first 20 miniatures, there are some generic ones in there that are just kind of like, flavor miniatures, but, you had to hit the, Jon Snow and the Hound and Jaime and Cersei and Tyrion, weirdly enough, didn't get done. He was 5027. So he was the 27th miniature that we did. And obviously he's huge and the Daenerys is in there and Robb and, all the Starks and the Lannisters and all of that or whatever. And so for us doing the name characters from a collector's perspective for just, the miniatures, this is outside of any war game or skirmish game or what have you, was a big thing that we just felt important. That it was very important to do, to get these characters out there. And George was hugely involved. Like I said, man, holy moly. And Tom Myers sculpted most of the main characters, whatever. Then Jeff Gray sculpted some as well. But yeah, George was very involved with everything and approving everything and the little nitpicky details. Well, no, this needs to be this needs to be that, and what have you. And so, and he just was tickled pink with the with what we did and kind of where we started the line and kind of took it. So
that's incredible. You think to have that level of collaboration with somebody who is up there with like authors like Tolkien and people like that, to actually understand from them what's required to actually produce these miniatures is absolutely fascinating. Were there any characters that you had in your mind's eye that when speaking to George, he was like, no, it's like this, and actually changed the way that you actually imagine the characters?
There was a couple of them where Tom went a certain direction, like, and so that was the interesting thing. At this point, there was stuff out there, like with Fantasy Flight Games for some of their card games. And then they did the board game, the Game of Thrones board game or whatever, kind of like it's like a Risk or whatever area control type of thing. But, and George would tell us like, well, no, I like this, or I don't like this, or they got this wrong, or this is good, but it's not perfect. But there were times where Tom just kind of came out like where George thought it should go right and Tom went left or something like that. And so we just have to start over on certain things. And like Jeff Grace took a stab at sculpting some main characters outside of the Greyjoys and outside of some wildlings or free folk. where we had to tweak things, or hey, that's not Mance, that's that looks more somebody like this, or hey, this needs to be changed, or so there's a lot of little, just this minute attention to details that's up in George's head, that it's not anywhere in any art or anything like that. But man, when he sits and looks at this stuff, and so it's a lot of like talking about like what in his mind's eye, what influences were there from like movies and books, especially visual things from his youth and like in his early adulthood before he started writing these books, in the early 90s, about like in his mind's eye, what does Westeros look like, right? And so it's not a dark, grim future like 40K or whatever, right? But giant proportions and superhuman people and stuff like that. But he does. I'm sure you guys will know this. There's a lot of really tall, really huge people in his books, and so. I was like, man, there's so many people that are like, 6'2", 6'4", 6'6". And so some of the miniatures are quite large, right? And then, you go from that all the way down to Tyrion and stuff like that. And then everything in between. So
fantastic.
A lot of tall characters, not a lot of old characters though. There's a few, but I feel like we're looking at some of the ages of certain people, and I was like, oh man, Eddard Stark, he's like 34 or something, and it's like a lot of these people dying off, and I was like, I'm getting up there a little bit, so it's just like, oh geez.
Well, that's super interesting you bring that up, Chase, because obviously with the HBO series, they had to push everything out,
right?
From an age perspective, right? And then you get Eddard, who's now Sean Bean, who looks like he's approaching the 50s, right? Where in the book he's like in his.
He said it,
30s.
Not us, Sean Bean. If you're listening, it's
yeah. Well, no, Sean Bean is amazing.
I'm just teasing.
Obviously, Peter Dinklage is amazing, and everybody that they had in the cast. That's kind of who you visualize now is a lot of the characters and stuff like that. When you think about them, like Tyrion will never not be Peter Dinklage, right? In my mind, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's a really good point about like the age and stuff like that, because a lot of the Stark children are like super young. And even Daenerys, was super young in the books or whatever. And you're just like, ooh, yeah. So even we kind of push some of the things out there a little bit, from an age perspective. So
moving on from the Dark Sword line, obviously you develop these miniatures, and there's tremendous number of miniatures. If anyone goes to the Dark Sword website, there's a bevy of different characters, and also obviously you have your other fantasy lines as well. But how did you then transition from that into the Song of Ice and Fire tabletop miniatures game that we love today? Can you talk a little bit about how that process went down?
Yeah, so that was always something that was on the table from day one, but learning from kind of the mistakes that testers made with trying to bite off more than they can chew, and the fact that everything we do is in metal, right? It's a lead-free pewter alloy, which is very expensive. You could do a skirmish game, right? And there's some of those that were out there. Heck, even like War Machine and War Hordes and all that stuff were at one point before they cut over to plastic, were done like in pewter or like resin or whatever, depending on the size of the model and the subject matter. Hell, even like Weird Miniatures, I know was pewter, back before they cut over to plastic. So in my mind, I was like, I always felt it needed to be plastic, and Dark Sword, obviously, we do metal. We do metal and resin, right? We could do plastic, right? We could go to China and do all that stuff. But I always told George that, we'll know when the time is right. And like when the right, partner comes along or something like that, for Dark Sword to work with. And, in my mind, it was always like, well, Dark Sword would do all the sculpting. We would just work with the appropriate company that could kind of put this thing out worldwide, that would do the things in plastic and stuff like that, right? Like we would know the opportunity when it presented itself, right? And lo and behold, this company that I'd been friends with, forever, that started out as like a website to kind of vote on miniatures. Like you post your miniatures up and people would rank them from 1 to 10, on how well they're painted and stuff like that. They started diving into plastics with this game called Super Dungeon Explorer that now Soda Pop Miniatures, that it's their company and their game or their IP or whatever. But I was like, oh, interesting. And I talked with Dave Dowis a lot about that, back in the day and like how expensive it was and stuff like that. In those first plastic board games that they did, you had to assemble the miniatures. Like it was like a tester's model kit, right? So you'd have to take the halves and glue them together and glue on the head and do this or whatever. Some of the miniatures were one piece. The industries then started moving towards more of this pre-assembled kind of board game, type thing. And Cool Mini obviously followed suit with that and then started doing this thing called Kickstarter. And their first Kickstarter they did was this game called Zombicide, which is now kind of the perennial main, like when you think of zombie board games or whatever, you think of that, right? And it's got all sorts of genres and stuff now, whatever. But it started out as that one Kickstarter that I think did like $780,000, which really put the industry on notice that, this was like, wow, oh my God, they can go do this thing and get the community to come in and back it and stuff like that. It was at that point, maybe like a year or two into that we really started talking about like joining forces and doing something, with the Song of Ice and Fire miniatures game. It was still kind of squishy about like whether we go skirmish or like, like a tray-based game, type of thing. If we do the whole pre-assembled aspect of the game came in like the 11th hour. It was originally supposed to be kind of like Games Workshop kits and stuff like that, where you could kind of set them up and glue them together and kind of pose them how you wanted and whatnot. And so yeah, it was just a really interesting journey, kind of from a company that I was comfortable with, that was at that point in what they were doing, that had an interest in the, the IP that, Dark Sword has the license to, and then just kind of joining forces with them and making sure that they did the subject matter and the book series, they did it appropriately. And it wasn't just like, okay, for whatever reason, Cersei's on the battlefield and she's running around with Varys. It's like, whoa, that can't happen, right? And so these are not people that are out there, mixing it up and going Joan of Arc and stuff like that. And so they're, doing the courtly dealings, the back alley dealings and stuff like that. And so that's where the whole concept of, these tactics cards and the tactics board kind of came about as a way to get all these characters from the books, that some of them are on the battlefield and some of them are doing courtly stuff, but a lot of them are just doing only courtly stuff, or a lot of them are only on the battlefield. And if they do the courtly stuff, they don't do it too well, like Eddard Stark, right? Didn't work out too well for old Ed.
Spoiler. We're gonna.
Yeah,
just kidding. Nobody.
If you haven't read book one, it doesn't end well for the Stark family. But
did you know when they sat down and were like, hey, we have something playable, and you started like pushing things around? Were you like, this is a thing, this is going to be big?
Well, what happened was I flew out there for like a week to sit down with Michael back when he was more pleasant, and a younger Michael, a more bright-eyed and bushy-tailed Mr. Michael. No, Michael's a good dude. He's a good man. I don't want him to force choke me from Canada. And so I went out there and they had their ideas for what they wanted to see in it. And I had my ideas for what I wanted to see in it. And so then they demoed a bunch of different games to me. One of them being super key to the DNA of the Song of Ice and Fire, miniatures game, was called Rum and Bones, that Michael had worked on. It's this awesome pirate game. They did two versions of it, like the normal Rum and Bones, and they did like a second Tide, where they kind of revamped the rules and stuff like that. But it had these things called Tide decks, which is basically like a tactics card hand, right? You had these different cards or whatever, and then you had characters that could do different things or whatever, and that move around these pirate ships that are fighting and stuff like that. And then you had like the normal troops that would just they have these predetermined paths that they kind of run up the ships or whatever and go fight and stuff like that. And that with some aspects of Wrath of Kings and some aspects of Dark Age, all of those things, we've got little parts of the DNA that came into what would be Song of Ice and Fire, because you're like, no, this is cool and we could use this for the characters, because I wasn't worried about the whole battle aspect of it. We wanted it to be deadly and brutal and like, not everybody's wearing plot armor.
Right.
We wanted, the game used to be even more brutal at one point. At one point, we had it set up where you didn't even get armor saves. If they hit you, you're dead. Right. And so, but we had to bring armor saves into it, because that's another kind of component that you can address units' powers on, right? And so, and of course, somebody in full armor, right, is going to be more well protected than some peasant running around or some, freedman running around with just rags on and some sort of cudgel or a pitchfork or something, right? And so, but we wanted the battles to be really brutal and bloody, and I wasn't worried about that aspect. The thing that I was most concerned about that we had to get right was just the whole, how do all these great characters that people love from the books and the show, because there's people that just do the show and they don't really do the books, how do we make sure that they're represented and people can have fun with them and have them be part of their builds and their forces, right? And have them impact the game, right? From off the board. And so we just thought that was a really neat idea about, so it's not just a Warhammer Fantasy Battle clone or whatever random, clone type of thing, where you just run at each other and just, it's a kill fest, type of thing. And so, not that some of these games don't devolve into kill fest, like, Fire and Blood and stuff like that,
right?
For different game modes and whatnot, but we wanted there to be more to it, and we wanted different game modes, we wanted different scenarios. So there's a whole lot to it where we wanted to just make this, like the best fantasy miniatures game that we could make it, type of thing with the IP. So
one of the things that comes across, and that really speaks to me, is that you're clearly like a fan as well of someone involved in the creation of things as well. Do you play much A Song of Ice and Fire?
Oh yeah, yes. Yeah, to the point where at one point, because I'm a huge board game guy, I love to try to paint miniatures when I can, right? But it's kind of the shoemaker's daughter type of thing where I'm working all day with Dark Sword and doing stuff with Dark Sword and art directing all of our miniatures and stuff like that. I'm working with the Cool Mini team, helping to approve and make sure that the things from concept art to sculpts and everything are good and true to the books and everything like that. Sometimes you just don't have it in you at the end of the day to then sit down and sling paint and paint miniatures and stuff like that. But I freaking love the game. We got a really great community here in Minnesota. We got some Northern Metro and the Twin Cities here. We got a bunch of people here, multiple stores that, support and carry the game. And then we've got some stores and people down in the southern part of the metro area that have done very well, like at Adepticon and Gen Con and stuff like that. We got like the first place finisher at Adepticon, Mark Roop here. We got Alex, who took second place at Gen Con. He lost to who took first? Oh my God,
Brett.
Yeah, I was like, Brett beat him out at Gen Con. I think it was him and Alex kind of fighting for first place there or whatever. And so we got a lot of great players here, and it's a really cool community that it just keeps growing and growing and growing. And matter of fact, there's a league that was starting, another league that Raz, one of the guys here, his name's Luke, but his nickname on Facebook is Raz, that they get these leagues going where, like, this is a mini league. It's only 6 games. It's an escalation league, goes from 40, 50, and 60 points. It's 2 weeks, and it's a different game mode every 2 weeks. So it's one game mode at 40 points, another at 50, and another at 60, just like a tournament, right? Where you have 3 matches, and each match is a different game mode type of thing. Right. It's the same sort of thing, but you don't have to keep your force. So it's not like a lockdown thing where the same 40-point list has to carry through to the 50 and you can add 10 more points. You can have whole new builds each week. And it's a way for people to just be able to experiment with their faction and have fun and not be like shackled to like, this is my 40 core, but I didn't really have Daenerys Mother of Dragons in there. Right. So I can't really do that now when I get to 50, because I got a bunch of Sword Masters or Dothraki veterans or what have you in my list, and they don't have room to kind of pull those things out. And so, we got a really vibrant, fun community up here. We do tournaments like every 2-3 months. Obviously during COVID, a lot of that got, smashed down and we weren't able to kind of gather in person and stuff like that just due to, state restrictions and whatnot. But long story long, yes, I love the game. I play the heck out of the game. And much to Michael's chagrin, I do bother him in the middle of games. I'm like, well, let me call the game design. And because I do have his personal number, and so I'll bug him, and sometimes he'll answer, most of the times he won't, and I'll have to text or whatever, like what the question is or whatnot. But so it's I have a blast with the game. I think it's super fun. I also in the late 80s into early 90s, I played a lot of Warhammer first and second edition. The old Rogue Trader in the second edition, and so loved it. It was super fun. We had a great group of people, and so, but then I just kind of fell out of love with it, in the late 90s. I had some 5th edition stuff, and I was like, not my dance anymore. But this is just like so good, right? There's so much more to it. There's so much depth to it, and so much breadth to it. Going across like what you can do, and it's just a lot more. It just scratches a lot of itches for me, right? In terms of a miniatures game.
And you're always like in it, right? Like you're always thinking, you're not like kind of waiting for like their person's 20-minute turn turn to end, and then you get to go. So we're all, I guess we're all fans here, aren't we?
Yeah. I mean, the whole I go, you go thing. I mean, we could sit and talk about the differences, but I'm assuming anybody that listens to your podcast, Mr. Chase on the Case, is they're familiar with the game, they like the game, and stuff like that, and so we don't need to talk about the differences and nuances of it or whatever. But yes, all of those differences and nuances. For me as a gamer, active board gamer, RPG or stuff like that, and an old miniatures war gamer, was just like, wow. And you hear that from a lot of people that are getting into the game. Mm-hmm. They are just like, oh, I used to do fantasy, or I did this, or I did that, or whatever, and they just the whole fact that you can play it right out of the box. You don't have to go home and spend a couple hours cleaning them up and gluing them together. And then, you can open it up, pull the card up, pull the tray up, put them on the tray, and you can be going. Obviously they're not painted, but you can play. Right. Yeah. And so it's a much more accessible game, which was one of the big goals of Cool Mini as well. They wanted to make it as accessible as possible to get people playing the game, and people that are really into the hobby side of it. They want to chop the miniatures up and repose them, do whatever. Super duper, knock yourself out, right? But there's a lot of people that just really appreciate the fact that they can spend their time playing the game because they're not as into the painting and converting aspect of the hobby as some people, right? So they can do that, right? They can just open it up and they're good to go. So.
And it helps bring in new people as well. One of the problems, though, is a game like this is because things are kind of priced in a pretty reasonable way. You can end up having, multiple armies or multiple factions if one hope. Is there a particular faction that catches your heart, or that maybe you feel is particularly amazing to you, or do you kind of like to dabble with a bunch?
I have everything, obviously. But
I'm really fishing for an answer here, but
no. Yeah.
If it's,
you'll get
is
an
it
answer.
Free Folk? Is it because that's a pretty amazing faction. I'm just saying.
Yes. Well, and so it's an interesting question, because obviously with the 2021 update, it's a whole new world, and everybody's kind of relearning like what makes their factions tick, like what the units are like now in this kind of new rebalanced game. Right. And so don't make the mistake of comparing it to 1.5 or 1.6, right? Mm-hmm. Oh, this unit stinks or whatever. It's like, wait a minute. It's there's little adjustments across everything, and little fine tuning that's happened and play tested and stuff like that. But so to keep this in mind, my answer is very 160, right? So from what I was playing the heck out of, and I did it in 2 leagues, which I did take first place in both leagues, by the way.
There we go.
Yeah. And there's some fantastic players, and so it was not something I expected or whatever.
I need to see the chat log with Michael. Then you're like, hey, I got a question for you. Make sure you say this.
Can you change this rule for me, please?
Yeah. Wow, it's like, man, everything Ludwig wants to have happen happens. It's kind of weird. No. And so, oh God, no, Michael. Well, we all know Michael's favorite faction. So if you want to just go with the game designer, just go neutral. Over the past, a year and a half, and I did it on purpose just to, obviously first and foremost, I was a Stark player. Right. Okay. And that's why like in the Kickstarter, there's like a little variant Sworn Sword Captain sculpt of me. Right. Mm.
Rather like, handsome looking gentleman there.
Well, it's got the receipt, but he gave me a cool scar and all sorts of stuff. And so
they think these are artistic license there as well, Jim. They sort of made you look pretty good there, didn't they?
Yeah. Well, no, I made him do like the thin hair up top and the receded hairline, but they gave me kind of like a cool Westeros mullet, and that was kind of blowing in the wind or whatever. But then they gave me like a cool scar or whatever. I'm like, that's cool.
Because I have to say, in getting to talk to you here, and we're doing this sort of video chat here, I was kind of looking to see if there was that cool mullet going on, but it doesn't seem to be
Oh God, no.
All right.
Yeah. But you've got the armor on, which is a surprise, but
Yeah, you're funny. But so Free Folk were what I started playing hard, just because everybody's like, oh, Free Folk suck, whatever. And, and talking with Mark Roop, and some players up here, it was like, man, Free Folk are freaking amazing. Well, what are these people talking about? And, but it's just some people don't like playing horde lists and having units die easily. So even if they're 3-point insignificant units, which is what Raiders used to cost. It's like, look, of course course they're going to go down hard compared to like a Sworn Brothers unit, right, or like a Warrior Sons unit or a Night's Watch Veterans unit.
It's like a third the cost of some of those.
Yeah,
units.
I mean, my God. And so, but like with the cheap NCUs and like the activations, the activation spam you could do and all the great NCUs that they had, it was pretty amazing, because even Steer used to be a 3-point NCU, right?
Yeah.
Lady Val, I mean, she's amazing. And so anyways, so Free Folk, I love Free Folk. My first time playing Free Folk in 2021, I got pushed around pretty good by Mark with the neutral force that he was running with some hedge knights and stuff in it. But I really wasn't kind of playing them right. We kind of talked about it after the game about like, well, hey, if you're running Cave Dweller Savages, you should really, have the alpha in there and, to kind of, amp them up and stuff like that. And so
you have a good mentor there. Good God.
Well, no, Mark's great. And so that's what's cool about like the community. And as we get back to being around the table instead of people being on TTS and stuff like that, that's the really cool thing about it, is that in-person interaction and just being able to sit and kind of like talk about stuff after the game, like, hey, this unit did tons of work for you and this NCU did tons of work, but you really weren't getting this unit to do much or whatever. And you kind of talk through things like where you think their lists are strong and where they're maybe deficient or ways like, is that the best attachment to have in that unit, type of thing, for this particular game mode. And so yeah, that's the cool thing about it is you just, when you're part of this community and you're playing in person, and there's a lot of this going on Facebook too, where people are asking for advice and whatnot. And the Song of Ice and Fire, miniatures groups, that are out on Facebook and whatnot. You get better, and it helps you kind of evolve your game and kind of get things focused on like, okay, is the list still thematically what I want it to be? And then is it got the right things in there that are in the right leader or, commander, and the right attachments and whatnot to really make the list click? And like, what are you trying to do with the list? Like, how are you going to win? Are you just going out to try to table somebody? Is this like an objective control list? Is this like some sort of panic list? And that's all going to be based off of faction and kind of like what you're selecting and stuff like that. And so Free Folk, I need to dive into them more here in 2021. I know Mark, because everybody's saying that Free Folk suck in 2021. He purposely brought them to a tournament we just had last week. And of course he took first place, won all 3 games, and all 3 games were crushing victories. And so there you go. Free Folk stink, I guess. So,
don't let the word get out there.
I know, we don't want to tell the internet.
Players,
we don't want to tell the internet, but yeah, he was really, it's definitely a finesse faction, and with the right builds and kind of making sure that you're doing the right things with the tactics deck and stuff like that. So it's not just a run up and punch people in the face faction. You can do that, but
they punch back. That's a scary part.
Yes, yeah. And Free Folk die easily. Like a lot of them die easily. They don't got the greatest armor. But the other faction that I really had a lot of fun playing, during 1.5 and 1.6 was the Night's Watch, and I know that faction had fallen out of favor pretty hard with competitive players and whatnot. A lot of people, they kind of got a bad rap, I think, when they first came out, because Sworn Brothers were only 6 points and they had Critical Blow and Sundering, and they were all around pretty rock solid for 6 points. But even at 7 points, I felt that they were still a really good unit. But yeah, the Night's Watch were a lot of fun to play and had a lot of fun playing them. But now for 2021, I'm back to playing Starks and, seeing what I can do with Starks. And in between, I played Targs. I mean, we play everything, right? You Greyjoys, Baratheons, straight neutralists, you name it. Because we do a lot of casual play events where people just kind of show up. You bring whatever army you want to play or armies you want to play, and you get a game or two in, over the afternoon. And then we do like league play, tournament play, all that stuff too. So
what do you do? You must have maybe some advice, or do you have like a storage solution here? Like, is your house just like one giant warehouse of miniatures here? Like, making your own miniatures and then having, these boxes of A Song of Ice and Fire miniatures, how does that work?
Well, Dark Sword's got its own warehouse, right? For
there we go.
The all business. Right. Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, I'm not, back when I started it was run out of my garage, right?
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah, Dark Sword was, absolutely.
But
and so same thing with Cool Mini. Same thing with Cool Mini. They were started out of Dave's basement, I mean, in Georgia when he started doing the online store and stuff like that. And so everybody kind of does the Microsoft or Apple thing, where they start out of the garage, right? And or I should say not everybody, but most companies. And so, but from a storage perspective, you're going to laugh, but I purposely like to keep everything in the boxes that they come in, because they got these beautiful vacuum formed trays that fit everything perfect. But that does limit some people who like to go crazy with the basing and stuff like that and do custom bases and whatnot. So a lot of people that are in our groups, if they go crazy with the custom basing and the painting and everything, they've got them all magnetized and, to the trays. And then they have they're like these stackable bins or whatever, these little, clamp bins that they put the trays in. You can fit like 4 or 6 trays on each level. And then that's how they transport their faction around, right? You can get the table war cases. You can do all sorts of different things, right? That people use for like 40K or privateer or what have you. You can get the foam cases that Battle Foam does, if you want like specific cutouts and whatnot. But I've got so much of it, keeping them in their actual original boxes lessens the footprint of them, right? And then I know exactly, I just grab that unit and the unit's in there, right? And so that's kind of how I do it. And I've got separate like card deck boxes and stuff like that I keep, like all the tactics decks and stuff like that for each faction, and all the attachment cards, commander cards, NCU cards. And then I've got special like extended deck boxes that hold the unit cards, the Terra size unit cards. So, and those I typically just have like in a toolbox or, some sort of thing. And then I got like one of those little toolbox organizers that it's almost like a tackle box. Yeah. That you flip open the top, and that's where all my tokens are and stuff like that, for everything. I keep like a set of Stark banners in there, which makes some people go crazy. Like if you're playing Lannisters and you got Stark banners, Stark activation banners. And so it's like, wow, that's what I had in the old tackle box there. So
see, this is incredible. You've really sort of outlined exactly why we love this game so much. It's seemingly very, very simple, but there's so much depth baked into it. We're talking about different factions, basically, pulling from the books, but also all the different rules, and they feel so different. But fundamentally, they're all trays of miniatures. And then if you then sort of compare that to how you got started with this, it must be extremely rewarding to see how this has evolved into this absolutely amazing, one of the top tier sort of tabletop miniatures games from, that initial email from George. It's quite the journey.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's really weird. Yeah. And you go into these stores and you see all that stuff and because pewter miniatures are becoming more and more niche, if you will, where a lot of stores just kind of carry plastic. And there's a couple stores here in Minnesota that still carry some Dark Sword stuff or whatever, the pewter miniatures, but all those stores then, carry the full song line and stuff like that. And so it's always fun to kind of go into stores and see all that stuff. And heck, even George sells this stuff in his, he's got a bookshop next to his movie theater down in Santa Fe, and they sell all this stuff there as well. And so hint, if you're looking for certain like between print run boxes or units or whatever, his store, I think is, they've even got some of the Kickstarter exclusive stuff there. Yeah. So
road trip. Here we go.
Yeah.
I got a signed rule book from there. So
nice.
Yeah, exactly. So that was a really good deal. Yeah.
So Michael and I know Chase knows this and Simon knows this, but a couple 2-3 years ago, Dave Doust, one of the executives there at Cool Mini, who was the founder that I've known since 2003. We went down to Santa Fe. Oh God, it must have been 4 years ago now. COVID kind of has thrown everything off. We went down there to visit George and Rhea, who was one of his assistants, and she's got a really strong art background, and so she's heavily involved in like all the approvals and the art direction and stuff like that Cool Mini takes, and when they tee things up and we kind of kick things around and whatnot, and then we'll bring George in if there's something that we're all kind of like, what does George think, right? Type of thing. But he's got books to finish and more HBO shows to write and all that stuff, and so we try not to bug him unless we have to pull him in on something. But Dave and I went down to New Mexico and to show them a bunch of these miniatures and stuff like that, very early on, and just kind of play around with the stuff. And that's where we did the famous, I brought a Michael Bolton Greatest Hits CD that George signed. And he signed it, to Michael and, personalized or whatever. Then I got a picture of George holding it and, kind of trolling Michael, because Michael's favorite faction is the Boltons and his name is Michael. So it's like, well, Michael of House Bolton, or just Michael Bolton for short. And of course, Michael's not a huge fan of Michael Bolton, just like the Office Space movie. And so of course we like to troll him about that sort of stuff or whatever. But so Michael and I were supposed to go last year but then everything got locked down for COVID. And so we were supposed to go to New Mexico, and I wanted to get some pictures of Michael and George, maybe with another CD or a cardboard cutout of Michael Bolton.
Yes.
Do
How do we
some
make this
fun
happen?
stuff.
We will help.
I know. But now he's like retreated to Canada, and you can't, he's hunkered down up there trying to take over Canada, as Michael does. And so I don't know when we'll get down there, maybe next year when things kind of lighten up a little more, we'll get down there to see George and show him some of the new toys and stuff like that. And get some pictures of him and Michael, because Michael did not make the trip for whatever reason. The first time around it was just me and Dave, but now it's like, we need to get Michael down there to kind of hang out. So,
and when he flies in, he can be greeted at the airport by Michael Bolton cutout.
So, but yeah, so I know George was doing his little wicked maniacal. George laughing was doing it, and it's explain the situation to him, and he had fun. George's got a really great sense of humor, a super funny guy, and the man, he can eat and drink. I can tell you that. And so, like when we go out, so he parties like a hobbit. And so he. George is a super good guy, just real down to earth. I mean, he'll sit and take you through his miniature collection and explain everything. And he gets all excited, just like we do, talking about the game. He gets excited about miniatures, and boy, he'll give you the full history lesson on the stuff. And it's fascinating. So, because it goes way back. So.
Yeah, well, fantastic. And, I really appreciate you coming on here and talking a little bit behind the scenes and about the legacy here behind A Song of Ice and Fire and Dark Sword Miniatures rolling it. So it's really great to get a chance to connect with you.
Yeah. Well, before we go though, come on. I have to ask you guys some questions.
So, here we go.
So Chase on the case. What faction or factions are you really digging here in pre 2021, so like 1.6, and then 2021. Where's your head at?
Yeah, so I have my collection has expanded somewhat, but I'm often known for really getting into free folk. I think that's my heart is always there, both thematically, a little bit of the underdogish there, and now with 2021, it's been fantastic trying to adapt to the new way they play and the attachments. And I'm thinking a lot more trying to move around my attachments. And someone actually sent me the list that Mark Rupp ran at your tournament, and I was actually looking through those. There's a lot of cool stuff he's doing as well. So I was kind of 2021 was a chance to fall in love all over again. It was just enough where it's I've been playing, since the game came out. As soon as Free Folk came out, I grabbed them and I played a lot of games with them. And now it's hey, you know what? I get to re-explore here. Yeah. I have also been experimenting with Targaryens. Over COVID, I got my whole starter set and everything painted up how I want it to be. And now I'm keeping it in line with the releases. So I've been dabbling a little bit of that just to have a little bit more speed on the table and having the cavalry maneuvers where
my God, they're just they were so alpha strikey in 1.6. They were veterans were veterans are 10 points. It's have you played it's just the bastards girls on steroids, right? And so the Targs are super fun. They're probably they're up there in top 3, top 4 factions for me as well.
And the way the new tactics card, the additional tactics card, it's such a small thing, but it actually makes a huge deal.
Yes. But that's what's so great about Fabio and Mike, right? And all of these little enhancements that are done in this continuous fine tuning of the game to make sure that everything is playable and there's no stinker units,
right?
Or too many overpowered units, because we don't do limitations like Games Workshop does, where it's you can only have one of this or whatever. The only time that comes into play would be unique units like the Dragons,
right? Or
Eddard's Honor Guard or the Bone Lord's Chosen, stuff like that, because it's got to have the character in there, or it's a named character or something like that, right? You can't have multiple Jamies on your army. You can have multiple Jamies on the table,
right?
But you can only have one in your army, type of thing. You can't have a bunch of clones running around there. So,
spoiler, maybe a future book plot twist or something. They're all clones.
Yes. And so, you're digging Free Folk then in 2021, and are you still dabbling around with Targs?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's been, really what it's been is I've been kind of hard at work trying to get as much Free Folk as possible. And then just kind of breaking up and being let's try zipping around here with some horses and, or having the immovable walls of spearmen.
Yeah. The pikemen and stuff like that.
Yeah. Or pikemen.
Yes, who are technically spearmen, yes. So, but well, that's cool. Okay, so switching gears here to Ryman Simon. I know you were a Night's Watch guy through and through there back in 1516. Is that still the case here with 2021?
So just so everyone knows, I kind of stepped back from A Song of Ice and Fire. Obviously, I've been very involved with the community for a number of years, and I just thought, hey, with COVID, I wasn't playing as much. I kind of just took a step back and looked maybe at some other games, and I didn't want it to become something that I was having to do. It's something that I enjoy. Now, you're right, Jim. Night's Watch was definitely my thing for a while, and I came to a realization with Night's Watch. I play in a group in Austin, and these folks are super patient, really nice people. They're all friends, and we used to meet every Tuesday to play. And I got very attached to a certain list for the Night's Watch, which involved the Bastards Girls. And it was probably slightly oppressive in terms of how you play it, because obviously you've got a lot of nuances. And once you know the deck quite well, you can pretty much obliterate someone's unit and then get a foothold and then accelerate from there. So I was playing sort of like Alpha Strike. The realization was that I wasn't really attached to the Night's Watch. I just like power. So with that in mind, I kind of moved over to...
As the English guy, he just liked power.
Exactly, just like power. So from that point of view, I then thought to myself, well, I'm actually a Lannister, I think, really, fundamentally, when it comes down to it. So
holy cow. I did not know that. I did not know that.
Another reason that I like Lannisters is, have you tried painting Night's Watch? it's they're great
spray and black, I thought, right?
Yeah, but it's kind of hard to be. I know that said, some people do absolutely fantastic job.
Yes,
you see Night's Watch sort of veterans with like blues and greens, and they look absolutely fantastic. But I have to work to my skill level. So I kind of like the Lannisters because there was a bunch of tutorials first of all, both in the Facebook
from Duncan
group.
and stuff. Yeah, like
Duncan Rose did a great one. I think Lannister Guardsman one he did. So I kind of copied that, and as I was doing that, I was getting more into Lannisters, and I've got more painted figures than I show my friends, because most of the time it's like, well, I'll just pull it, like you say, a box, the plastics, and get them to the table really quick.
Yeah.
Now with that said, I think with 1.7, I'm going to explore Lannisters fully. Definitely, I'm going to do a lot more there. But I did also acquire the Greyjoy starter set and a few boxes there. So for me, I think that I want to sort of start with that. It's a great starting point because the additional units will come out, so you'll grow with that army. So anybody who's getting into it now, fantastic place to get into it. But also, I do love the neutrals. I do love the Hedge Knight models. For me, are absolutely fantastic.
I love them. Yep.
This for me is exactly what I imagine in terms of like knights of sort of bygone age. So having those there and the possibilities and customizing those. So I think Lannisters for me is where my comfort is. Night's Watch, I always have a place in my heart, but things have changed. I'll go back to it. But I don't want to get too much into anything. But I can tell you right now, as one faction I will not play are the Free Folk. So just let that be known.
So I see how it is. How do we?
Wow.
Jim, do you ever do conventions? I feel like we need to do like a 2v2. We can let Michael and Simon face up against two Free Folk players and us, and we'll settle this once and for all.
God, you know how many Bastards girls would be on the table?
That's true.
Michael likes to run two of them.
We'll bring Harm of the Dog's head. We'll take care of that.
Yeah. Oh no, that would be great to do once. I know Cool Mini and Asmodee and Fantasy Flight are not going to Gen Con 2021. Is our, I don't think Wizards is. There's a lot of companies that are just to be safe.
Liabilities.
Yeah. Well, it's just kind of, it's like, you know what? Let's maybe give it another year type of thing. But if everything kind of gets back to it 2022, that would be fantastic. Because I know Brett, he's in Indy, right? To get a bunch of people that kind of meet out there. I know there's a lot of talk about Adepticon 2022, with Mark and a lot of the local Minnesota people, and I'm pretty sure Brett would get out there and stuff like that. But yeah, if like Cool Mini's going to be there in an official presence, even just doing tournament stuff or whatever, I'll make for damn sure, unless I got conflicting plans, that I can get out there too. So yes, we should for sure teach these upstarts, the power of north of the wall.
There we go.
It's on.
Yeah, because but the Lannisters are super intriguing in 2021. Brett and I were kicking lists around when there was all this like anti-Night's Watch gun line. Oh, it's broken, blah, blah, blah. All this stuff that was raging on the interwebs about that. And so I was like, okay, well, I kind of was like challenge accepted type of thing, started kind of building lists for that. And the funny thing is like up here in Minnesota, you don't even really see that meta. right? Like the whole, let's just, go out there with one or two units of crossbows with a watch captain in there and stuff like that, and just try to mow people down. But because I think there's a lot of counters to that. And I know that if there's people here that are really hyper competitive, well, what are the counters, whatever. It's like, it's like, you got to play the game. I mean, the game, it's 2021.
There's a lot of variables when you get stuff on the table.
Yeah.
And there's some sleeper, I think there's some sleeper power combos out there and factions that maybe people aren't
just having quick stuff, having quick things that can cross the board, one or two cav units or some fast stuff that can get there and close the gap and get into them. Right. It's just like, they'll die really quickly. Right. The trays will, the trays will go down really quickly with captains and stuff like that. And I know the list is kind of a tabling list, right? So like an objective control list might do really good against it. And so there's a lot of, and that's what's fun about the game. One of the really good players out of Minnesota here and I were chatting after the tournament about how, remember when Night's Watch first came out, they got all sorts of hate, like that they were overpowered. They're like the Training Wheels faction, all that stuff. But there's so much nuance to the game that the Night's Watch were just so like on paper, like they're like easy to play. They can run up and punch. They did a lot of things well because they're like a toolbox faction. They can just do lots of stuff pretty well, right? But they're not like, they can't really ever stop much, right? Like, Lannisters with denial and stuff like that, or neutrals. They don't really do good with dish and tokens and whatnot. But my buddy Luke, he had made the comment. He goes, I almost feel like the Night's Watch are one of the more straightforward factions of 2021. And so that's why they're getting all the hate, because people are figuring them out now. But as things progress, people are going to figure out Lannisters and free fall. You know what I mean? Everything is going to get figured out, and there's going to be counters to different things and stuff like that. And so, and
then there's terrain, for example. Line of sight is a pretty good blocker for crossbow.
Yes. Yeah. And so, especially if you can choose terrain and stuff like that, you're dropping down, forests and stuff like that. And so, it's there again. I actually look forward to kind of playing against some gunline lists. Maybe putzing around with it and just kind of seeing what there is to see, because I know they are tough. Yeah. If you get somebody that's playing it right, it can be a real pain in the butt, to run up against that. But I do feel that there's some Achilles heels in that too, in that sort of thing where it's like with the NFL and stuff like that, where you got these super prolific run and gun, super high output offenses and stuff like that. Or like when the Patriots played the Rams and stuff like that, the Rams were called the greatest show on turf, and the Patriots held them to 10 points or whatever. It's like a 13-10 game or whatever. It's like there's always ways to kind of get around and kind of match up and stuff like that.
And to be frank, like it's this is a living game, and it's been really exciting seeing updates from 1.4 to 1.5 to 1.6, and that sure, maybe things are overpowered, and great, that can be addressed. And so it's fun to see this roll out, and there may be other things that are out there that are also powerful, and we'll see.
But 2021 is not even officially out yet. People just have access to it via the test flight app. Right. And so it's not even out yet. It's not even live. And, people are kind of learning all this stuff, and a lot of people are jumping in with both feet into 2021, which is great. But it takes a minute, and you got to figure this stuff out. Right. And you got to get the games in and play the games and stuff like that. And it's not just a run at people, jousting game, right? You just run and punch each other. Right. There's a lot of setting up the units, making sure you jump on certain zones that you want to control to kind of power up your units. And you got the right tactics cards in your hand. And so, there's a whole lot. And that's what we love about the game, right? Is the nuance and the subtlety of the game, and how it kind of goes on multiple levels. I'm sure we've all been there where you get bad dice rolling, or you just drawing like the worst possible cards, right? Yeah. Although I don't think that's as much of an issue in 2021 as it was in 1.6.
Nothing was like back with the panic, where it's like, it didn't happen that often, but when it did happen, you rolled snake eyes, and it's like, I just lost 8 raiders. And it's like, okay.
They all ran away.
Wow.
It's like, wow, that charge, I guess.
It's like Cersei has a lot of pull north of the wall. What the hell's going on? Right?
But it's been cool to see like the incremental changes, and like it's still that same game we love. Like there's been a lot of changes, and there hasn't. Like, and so it's this kind of weird state where it's these making these tweaks, and it's still always that thing that we love. So it makes it easy to come back to.
Yeah, and as things get clarified and further refined, it's a process. And but if you look at the game where it is now to where it was released. you know, to your point, Chase, about like the old panic rules and stuff.
Yeah.
It's just like, it didn't happen often, but man, when it did,
right,
that kind of, you know, really hits you hard in the gut, right? With those failed panic tests and stuff like that. And so, especially with panic bombs, right?
Yeah.
So,
like everybody felt bad when that happened. Like even if you did it to somebody else, like, yeah, I'm sorry. And it did right.
I guess
it was, yeah, go ahead.
I guess the good thing was that they were insignificant free folk raiders. If they were like your, you know, Lannister guardsmen or, Kingsmen or other things that were more expensive, maybe that felt worse.
Oh, yeah. I mean, now you got the horrific visage and Lannister supremacy and kind of the new rules around them. And man, you want to get into Night's Watch, get into them, just run a bunch of units with Lannister supremacy at them, because it doesn't trigger just off of melee attacks. It's range attacks too, right? Now, granted, they got a 5 morale on those crossbowmen. And so, but with the stacks and the modifiers for Lannister supremacy, you can get into them.
Where you want to put those resources.
Yes. So yeah, there's just so much to it, right? And I play the heck out of the game. I'm sure you guys have played the heck out of the game, and a lot of people that are listening and tuning in. But man, even unless you're playing it like 3-4 times a week, even if you play the heck out of the game, you're not like awesome at every faction, right? Or maybe you're really good if you got a couple factions. You can really get a couple factions really dialed in and honed or whatever. Like Simon said, you get like this killer list combo that is just like amazing. You get it dialed. It's almost like a tournament list, right? Yeah. And so, but sometimes it's fun just doing weird stuff as well. Like I built a going back to 1.6. There was a time where the Adepticon winner Mark Roop, him and Isaiah came up from the Southern Metro to play some games, just some fun games. I just ran a stupid, I wouldn't let myself have more than one of any unit, just like a start list, like a very generic, like out of the starter box with a couple units or whatever. And I beat him. He was testing out some new neutrals in like the Mummer skirmishers and stuff like that or whatever, but it was just this real nondescript list that you go, but I'm just like, it's just a fun list, right? It was to kind of help train people, new players, on how to play Starks. And it was like hugely effective, right? Because I guess nobody at that point was really playing Caitlyn. And so like Caitlyn's ability to kind of go on a unit and remove a token or whatever and do whatever, that I guess foiled many of Mark's plans that he had for this list or whatever, because he was dishing tokens like crazy, but I just was taking them off, with different things. And it was a tightly fought game, but I didn't think I was going to win. I was just playing to have fun. Right. And, that's why you got to show up and play the games. So, and two, don't be scared to have fun and just kind of build lists that are kind of interesting and where you kind of challenge yourself to kind of make something work. Right. So, and kind of know what you're going into, like when you jump into the game. I don't know about you two, but so when you guys play casually, do you have your list and then roll for game mode, or do you roll for game mode, then choose a list?
So for us, it kind of depends on who exactly casually we're playing with. But a lot of times we'll do it just on what our agreement is between that person. Every once in a while, there'll be somebody who's like, hey, I've really got a list I want to play on this game mode. I want to try this out on it. And I'll be like, sure, like that's fine. I can bring something for that. But, other times we'll even sometimes, a lot of times just bring 2 lists, we'll roll.
Well, so you do it like a tournament where you have your 2 lists, you roll the game mode and you pick you show the list and then you choose after seeing their list. Okay.
But it really depends if it's on like, if we're just showing up a game night, like let's match up and do it this way. That's fine. So it's just the social expectation, I guess. We vary it up a bit.
Okay. How about you, Simon?
Super casual. Basically got your army, turn up. What are we going to do? What do you feel like? Do this, do that. Not that one. We did that last week. Okay, let's change it up and just get in. So when we play, it's mostly chatting about things and the book and just catching up. So it's a real social occasion for us. It's a group of friends, and the game sort of is a sort of brings everyone together. But ultimately, it's it's more about the community and the fun we have together. One thing I've noticed actually, you were talking about the way the game ebbs and flows in terms of perceived power. And, we were talking about having strong lists back in 1.6. But it really strikes me, it's very similar to a book. Like these are chapters of a book. If you look at A Song of Ice and Fire, and the different factions, how they are resurgent and powerful, it kind of is reflected in how we've seen what's seen in the game state as well. So I think most players can look back and actually say, oh, I remember when Night's Watch were really powerful and now the Lannisters are resurgent. And that's a really cool thing as well. I think there's a narrative there where, obviously everybody wants to have a great balance to experience, but also to have that flavor. And I think it's so challenging to take a game, which is basically like 5D chess, and completely balance every aspect of that, especially when there's so little in terms of restrictions on what you can run. That, inevitably there are going to be these edge cases, which are somewhat challenging to play against. But I think that overall, if you're coming at this from just the fun perspective, and I'm always a champion of the fun side of it. I'm a real casual when it comes to that regard. Yeah. But actually looking at the game like that, there's so much to offer. So for me and my friends, it's really just to show up and just play what you want to and have fun.
Yeah. It's a social contract, right? It's like, if everyone's in agreement of what we're here to do, then it's fine. It's when you have those like misalignments where it's like, I should have put two lists, and you brought your one list and you were like, hey, I want to play Dance with Dragons. It's something I want to practice. And I'm like, well, no, let's roll. And then that's where you get off to the wrong footing.
Yeah. Cause like with our casual play, we typically show up, you just say, I got my list, and you roll for game mode. And so sometimes you just figure out, it's like, wow, this list isn't all that great for that game mode or whatever. Right. But you kind of learn it and you have to adapt and overcome. And so maybe we should pivot to more something where you have your two lists and you kind of treat it like it's casual. But where you have a couple game lists, and depending on the game mode, you could, pick whatever one you want or whatever.
Depends on how much time you got, really. Like, I think some of the best games and the best times I have are when we just show up and we're like, hey, I really want to be practicing Game of Thrones. Like, you got something you could play on that? I'm like, let's do it. And
do
it that way.
Yeah. Especially if you're going to practice for like a tournament or some sort of organized play event or something like that. Or if you're in a league or something like that, the league, going in, right? So you're like, well, hey, this week we're playing Game of Thrones, right? And so you build your list for Game of Thrones, right? And so, so you kind of know ahead of time. But yeah, it is, to the point that you were making, Chase and Simon, about, kind of the rule of fun, and then like the rule of cool too, where it's like, oh, this is just a cool faction. Like, this kind of scratches that itch for me. Right. And so, and the cool thing about the game is like every faction, they, they're all dudes on a tray or monsters or siege engines or cavalry or whatever, but they're all kind of work a little bit different, and they got their little thing that's kind of their, that makes that faction tick. And so that's what's just so amazing about it, especially with like the upcoming factions that we're working on and a lot of these different units that are coming out. There's a lot more stuff coming out here in 2021 still, and some really cool units, and rumors of hero boxes, Chase.
Oh, all right. So you'd say then that the future for A Song of Ice and Fire is looking pretty bright then, or?
Yes. Well, especially for one of your favorite factions and one of Simon's favorite factions. There's hero boxes, the number 2 coming out for them. And so I'm super, because anytime a hero box comes out, it's just like,
like a new army, it changes everything.
Yes, it changes everything. And that's what's so fun. I mean, when new factions drop, that's obviously fun. Yeah. Like, well, what mechanics make this faction go, like with the pillage and the Greyjoys and stuff like that. But man, when you get like new unit boxes, that, or not unit boxes, but hero boxes, it's like, oh, it's so good. It's so good.
And then it's such ripple effects too, because it's not only for you playing, but then everyone has to learn to play against that. And like, just sends shockwaves.
It's just fun. It just kind of just shoots new life into each faction that gets the hero box. And so it's just a lot of fun, and it's just a great time to be in the game and having fun with the game. There's just so much cool stuff coming up. I mean, I think we're almost at like 100 unit boxes or unit and hero boxes that are out for the game. We got 8 factions now, with another 1 or 2 factions, coming out in 2022. And, just depending on what the release schedule looks like. And so there's just a lot of, it's really cool. It's a lot of fun. And it's just been a blast. I mean, we started developing it, like a good 2-3 years before the Kickstarter even.
Wow.
So it's been quite the long, partnership, and it's been super fun. It's super awesome. And I think Cool Mini and Michael and Fabian, the team, and Guillerme and stuff like that, Preddy, and all the people that are involved with it, they've just done like such an amazing job. And they're huge fans of the original IP as well. And it shows, it shows. There's been a few things here and there where it's like, oh, we missed this or we missed that or whatever. And you have to do things everybody can't be running around with spears or pitchforks or, whatever. You have to do things to make it interesting with the different units and stuff like that. Right. And so we're like, this unit's got swords, or this unit's got hammers, or this unit's got bastard swords or bows or crossbows or whatever. And so, I know some people are like, well, this is not historically accurate. It's
right.
Like, well, it's not. Well, good thing it's not a historical book. And so, and it's very grounded in historical accuracy in many aspects, right? Which are things that were interesting to George. But it's still got to be a game, and it's got to be fun, and it's got to be interesting. And so it's got to be enjoyable to play with cool minis. So
it's exciting to see that you, as well as many of the people at CMON's, passion is equal to that of the fans, that you guys are just as big of fans as what's going on as everyone else's. And, we really appreciate you coming on the podcast here. We hope we can talk to you again in the future, maybe hear some updates on how your games are going in 2021 at some point.
All right. Chase on the case. Simon, it's always a pleasure.
And until then, we hope you get your miniatures on the table.